Freeze. Stop right there. It's over. Don't move. Hands up. You're coming with us. The evidence is all here. It was horrific. A husband who, for the sake of his young lover, murdered his wife, dismembered her body, and disposed of the remains in their home's septic tank. Imagine this. A beloved young wife suddenly vanishes one day without a trace. A mother consumed by anxiety. A police force launching an investigation. And a community wondering where she could have gone. No one could have imagined that behind the walls of a magnificent mansion, such a horrifying secret was hidden. The husband, who should have been her protector, became her executioner, destroying his own family for a young lover. That night, following a meticulously planned scenario, the wife fell helplessly. By dawn, the house had become a silent witness to how love could curdle into the darkest of tragedies. Even more shocking was the discovery that the wife's body was not found in a field, a river, or a forest, but dismembered inside the septic tank of their own home. This is a true story that horrified a city, a bitter lesson about fidelity, betrayal, and the devastating price of momentary lust. The disappearance. Greenwich, Connecticut, a town nestled in the heart of Fairfield County, is a portrait of American affluence. Manicured lawns surround sprawling colonial homes, and the serene waters of the Long Island Sound glitter in the distance. In recent years, the town has seen even more wealth pour in. New developments have risen, and luxury estates have been built by those who, after making their fortunes in New York City and beyond, return to raise their families in idyllic suburban peace. On the surface, Greenwich was a town filled with promise. Every evening, children played in pristine parks, neighbors chatted on their front porches, and the distant ringing of church bells seemed to bind all residents in a warm embrace. But behind the tall iron gates and firmly shut front doors, not all lives flowed as beautifully as they appeared. There were fractured families, marriages eroded by infidelity, and dark secrets waiting to be exposed. In early November of 2012, a cold autumn rain brought a chill and the damp smell of earth to every corner of the town. The rain fell almost every afternoon, making the atmosphere even more somber. On one such damp morning, with the sky still gray from the overnight downpour, a shocking event occurred that would shatter the town's tranquility. The usually quiet atmosphere at the Greenwich Police Department turned tense. A middle-aged woman in simple clothes, still damp from the drizzle, rushed in, trying to hold back her tears. She was Eleanor Vance, a 55-year-old resident of a more modest neighboring town. With a choked voice, laced with sobs, she reported that her daughter, Sarah Anderson, had been missing for over a week. "I've called her so many times, Detective," Eleanor's voice trembled, "but her phone just goes straight to voicemail. I've asked my son-in-law, Michael, but his answers don't add up. My heart, a mother's heart, knows something is wrong." Sarah would never, ever leave her child like that. The report was immediately assigned to Detective Jack Riley, the head of the Major Crimes Unit. Known for his firm yet empathetic approach, he calmed the incessantly weeping Eleanor and listened patiently to her story. Years of experience had taught him that a mother's words were often sharper than logic. A mother's intuition is rarely wrong. Eleanor's story was not just about a missing daughter. Sarah, who had just turned 30, had been married for nearly 10 years to Michael Anderson, the head of a successful real estate development firm. Their 5-year-old son, Leo, was the light of Sarah's life. But recently, their marriage had been rocky. Michael, who often worked on projects in New York City, was coming home less and less frequently. When he did return, his presence brought not happiness but frequent arguments. For Eleanor, this wasn't just a case of lost contact. She was certain her daughter would never have left home, especially not abandoning her only son, Leo, whom she adored. Even if the world were ending, Sarah would never leave her child, she murmured softly. Those words struck Detective Riley like a dagger. Outside the police station, the rain began to fall again. The sound of it hitting the tin roofs and glass windows seemed to add to the heavy atmosphere of that morning. Detective Riley sensed this was no ordinary missing person case. He decided to lead the investigation himself. Something inside him whispered that a great secret was hidden behind Sarah Anderson's disappearance. And sure enough, a few hours later, The investigative team arrived at the luxurious three-story home of Michael and Sarah Anderson on the outskirts of Greenwich. It was here that a horrific story would begin to unfold, a story that would not only destroy a family, but also shake the heart of everyone who heard it. The first investigation. Detective Jack Riley could still picture Eleanor Vance's face as she left the police station that morning. Her eyes, filled with tears, trembled continuously. Her hands shook as she clutched a wedding photo of her daughter. That photo was now in his shirt pocket, a constant reminder that every step he took today was connected to a human life. He knew this was more than a simple disappearance. A veteran detective's gut, honed by years in the criminal world, was screaming that something was wrong. With two of his team members, Detective Miller and Detective Chen, Riley headed straight for Michael Anderson's house on the outskirts of Greenwich. The short journey felt long. The rain started again, drumming a monotonous rhythm on the car's windshield. The small town was in the throes of a late autumn storm, and the gray atmosphere deepened the gloom in Riley's heart. He recalled Eleanor's words, "Sarah would never leave her child like that." That simple but firm sentence from a mother kept echoing in his ears. Michael Anderson's house stood out among the other buildings, a three-story structure painted a brilliant white, with a tall iron fence adorned with magnolia flower decorations. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but Detective Riley had seen too many luxury homes that concealed great cracks within. The police cruiser stopped right in front of the main gate. A man in neat clothes was waiting at the front door. It was Michael Anderson, the son-in-law Eleanor had just reported. Michael wore a well-ironed light blue shirt. His face looked tired, his hair hastily combed, and a faint smile played on his lips. He came forward, trying to be welcoming and kind. "Please, come in, detectives. Thank you for coming. I'm so confused by this whole situation myself," he said as he opened the door. His voice was flat, as if trying to sound reassuring, but not entirely genuine. The living room they entered was filled with expensive furniture. A black leather sofa, a gleaming glass coffee table, and a large display cabinet filled with crystal ornaments. The air conditioning was on, making the interior cool despite the heavy rain still falling outside. But to Detective Riley, the chill came not from the machine, but from the strange atmosphere. The house was clean, too clean, as if there were no trace of warm, lived-in life at all. Michael invited them to sit and began to tell his story. He repeated most of what Eleanor had already conveyed, but adapted it into his own version, which sounded neat, as if from a prepared script. "The truth is, Sarah and I had a huge fight," he said, bowing his head as if in regret. "I told her the truth, that I was seeing another woman. I wanted to resolve things amicably. I even had divorce papers drawn up. But my wife refused, got angry, and started screaming. The next morning, when I woke up, she was already gone. A few of her clothes were missing too. I thought she just needed to go out and cool down. I'm hoping she comes back soon." Detective Riley nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He knew that the more detailed a story, the more likely it was to be fabricated. His eyes studied Michael's body language, the slightly anxious hands, the occasional glance at the wall clock, the way he exhaled, as if suppressing something. Riley recorded all of this in his mind. The initial investigation began in the master bedroom on the second floor, where Sarah and Michael usually slept. The room looked very neat. The closet was open, and indeed, some of Sarah's clothes were gone. However, her valuable personal items remained. A jewelry box, imported perfumes, expensive cosmetic sets, all were neatly arranged on the vanity, as if they had just been left behind. Detective Riley stared at the vanity for a long time before murmuring softly, "When a woman leaves home, she usually takes her most cherished possessions. Why is all of this still here?" Detective Miller, who was searching the room with him, headed to Leo's small room. Scattered toys, a small bed with sheets printed with cartoon characters, and an empty atmosphere. Michael quickly explained, "After our fight, I took Leo to stay with a relative. I didn't want the child to be disturbed." On the surface, it was a plausible answer, but to Detective Riley, it only added to his suspicion. If his wife had left home, why would the father rush to send the child away? Shouldn't he keep Leo by his side to protect him? They moved to the second-floor bathroom. As soon as the door opened, the sharp smell of cleaning solution hit their noses. Detective Chen coughed and covered his mouth against the pungent odor. The white-tiled floor gleamed, and the walls shone as if they had just been scrubbed. To clean, Riley thought. He bent down and examined the drain on the floor. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why did you need to use so much cleaner?" he asked. Michael answered quickly, "I'm a bit of a neat freak, detective. I disinfect this bathroom every week. Maybe I just happened to spray a little too much yesterday." The answer flowed fluently, strengthening Riley's conviction that something was being hidden. The investigation continued to the backyard. There was a secondary utility kitchen that was rarely used. In the corner of that room stood a large machine. It was clearly not an ordinary appliance. It was a large, commercial-grade grinder, the kind you would normally see in a butcher shop or a sausage factory. It was shiny and looked as if it had just been washed. Detective Miller approached it, touched the surface, and then whispered to Riley, "This is strange. Detective, why would a home like this have a machine this big? It's not like they're running a food business." Riley stared at the machine for quite some time. His mind was racing. The sound of rain falling on the tin roof behind them added to the tension. In his mind, small pieces began to fit together. The overpowering smell of cleaner in the bathroom, the excessively neat house, the hastily sent away child, and now this abnormal meat grinder. He said nothing, just made a note in his small notebook. But in his heart, he was sure. This house was hiding something more than just a story of a wife leaving her husband. Michael stood at the back door, still trying to maintain a friendly demeanor. His smile was forced, but behind his eyes, there was a clear tension. Riley looked at him for a moment, and then said in a flat tone, "Thank you for letting us search the house. But the investigation is not over. We will be back with a forensics team for a more detailed examination." Michael just nodded, trying to appear calm. But to Detective Riley's eyes, that smile now looked like a thin mask, ready to crack at any moment. In his mind, the detective whispered, "Sarah Anderson didn't go anywhere. The answer is right here, inside this luxurious house full of secrets. And sooner or later, that truth will be revealed." The forensics and the neighbor. The next morning, the sky over Greenwich was still covered in gray clouds. The overnight rain hadn't completely stopped, leaving only a fine drizzle that wet the roofs of the residents' homes. A van from the Connecticut State Forensics Laboratory stopped in front of Michael Anderson's three-story house. From inside, several agents in white uniforms and full gear emerged. Detective Jack Riley got out with them, a small file in his hand. Today was the day to trace the truth in a more scientific way. Michael was standing at the front door. His face was more rigid than yesterday. His shirt was wrinkled, and his hair was disheveled, as if he hadn't slept all night. The smile he tried to force looked awkward and no longer convincing. "Detective, wasn't yesterday's investigation enough?" he asked in a strained tone. Riley looked at him expressionlessly. "There are a few things we need to confirm. This is standard procedure. Please cooperate." Michael slowly nodded. His steps were stiff as he opened the door. The forensics team immediately split up to their tasks. They headed straight for the second-floor bathroom, which had aroused suspicion yesterday. Turning off the lights and closing the curtains, the room became pitch black. The sound of rain from outside became clearer, adding to the eerie atmosphere. An agent sprayed luminol solution all over the floor and walls. After a few seconds of silence, the room transformed. A faint, glowing blue-green light appeared, as if thousands of tiny fireflies were stuck to the tiles. Detective Chen gasped. "My God," he muttered. The stains were numerous and concentrated around the drain. From that point, the light formed a pattern that led in a long trail toward the bathroom door, as if something had been dragged out. Riley approached with a grim face and followed the glowing trail with an ultraviolet flashlight. The pattern ended at the threshold of the master bedroom. There was also a faint stain next to the bed. All of this presented a clear picture. Something that had bled profusely had been in this room, and was then moved to the bathroom. An agent photographed the evidence. The space that had previously looked clean now seemed to scream out the secret it was trying to hide. Riley felt a shiver run down his spine, not out of fear, but because his gut feeling was growing stronger and more certain. Sarah Anderson did not leave the house. She was victimized here. Meanwhile, in the backyard, another team was examining the utility kitchen. In the corner of the room stood the large meat grinder that had raised Riley's suspicions yesterday. The machine was shiny, as if it had just been washed, but a faint smell of metal mixed with detergent lingered in the air. The agents took photos from various angles, recorded the machine's serial number, and took several samples from the small crevices of the blades. A machine this big is usually used in restaurants, one agent commented, but this kitchen shows no signs of business. No meat stock, no auxiliary equipment. Riley just made a short note that the machine had to be taken to the lab for testing. After finishing the investigation, Riley decided to gather information from the surrounding neighbors. He walked to the house next door, where a woman named Mrs. Gable lived, who was known to be quite close to Sarah. As soon as she saw the police, a mix of relief and worry appeared on Mrs. Gable's face. She invited them in and, before being asked, began to speak. The night before Sarah disappeared, I heard them arguing violently, Mrs. Gable said softly. The sound was so loud it reached our house. The sound of things falling, even the sound of a door slamming. Then, later that night, I heard a loud machine sound. A noisy sound like a grinder, and it was past midnight. The machine didn't stop for a long time, almost until dawn. Riley and his team members looked at each other. This testimony matched their suspicions exactly. The grinder now in the backyard kitchen had indeed been used on the night Sarah disappeared. Mrs. Gable bowed her head for a moment and then continued, I never saw Sarah again after that day. Usually, she would stop by to buy vegetables from the front store or just to chat. But after that night, she just disappeared. I asked Mr. Anderson, and the answer was always the same. She left in anger. But my heart didn't believe it. Riley recorded every detail. He then asked about the couple's young son, Leo. Mrs. Gable's expression softened. A few days after the commotion, I saw Leo being led away by a young woman's hand. She said she was his aunt. The child's face was pale, and his eyes were swollen as if he had been crying for a long time. I never saw the child again after that. This information added a new piece to the puzzle. Michael had not only hidden his wife, but had also deliberately removed his son, so that he wouldn't witness anything at home. It was too meticulous a measure to be a coincidence. After securing the testimony, Riley returned to the car with his team members. The drizzle had now turned into a heavier rain, beating a loud rhythm on the car's roof. He looked at Michael's house through the rain-streaked window. The building stood magnificently, but to Riley, it no longer looked that way. What he saw was a cold wall harboring a dark secret. Detective Miller finally spoke up. Detective, all of this clearly points to one conclusion, but we still need truly irrefutable evidence. Riley nodded slowly. Right, we have blood, a strange machine, and a neighbor's testimony. But to break his mask of lies, we need something more concrete. The drain pipe, the crevices of the machine, all of it needs to be tested in the lab. Only scientific evidence can break his defense. The car started to move, leaving the house behind. The car was quiet, with only the sound of the wipers clearing the rainwater. Riley took Sarah Anderson's photo from his pocket. The gentle smile in the photo felt so starkly contrasted with the grim reality they had uncovered. In his heart, he made a vow. No matter how long and arduous this path may be, the truth must be revealed. It was as if the gloomy Greenwich sky was weeping along, and behind it all, the shadow of what truly happened on the night Sarah disappeared was just beginning to surface, becoming clearer and clearer. The scientific proof. A few days after the search of Michael Anderson's house, the atmosphere at the Greenwich Police Department had never been so busy. The Connecticut State Forensics Laboratory was buzzing with activity. Test tubes filled with clear liquid lined the desks. A faint smell of formalin hung in the air, and a PCR machine hummed steadily, like a long, unending breath. The experts worked with serious faces, their fingers adept at transferring samples using tiny pipettes. Detective Jack Riley stood behind the safety glass, watching. He wasn't a scientist, but his long experience told him the answer was right here, among the small pieces collected from Michael's house. The bloodstain samples from the bathroom were tested first. The results detected hemoglobin-conclusive evidence of human blood. The amount was significant. This couldn't have come from a minor injury, a technician said softly. Detective, this amount means there was a major bleeding event. The victim might have died there. The words rang loudly in Riley's ears. Even more tense was the examination of the bathroom drainpipe. The forensics team had to dismantle the foul-smelling iron pipe. Inside, they managed to extract small bone fragments and soft tissue clinging to them. Everything was placed in sterile containers and processed in the PCR machine. Riley stared at the computer screen showing a winding graph. A genetic code was slowly being read. A forensic scientist turned to him and said, "It's human DNA. We need a family comparison sample to confirm the identity." Riley immediately contacted Eleanor Vance. She came with slow steps. Her face was pale, but her gaze was firm. Through tears, she handed over her blood sample. "Whatever the result, I'm ready. I just want to know the truth," she said. Her words silenced the lab for a moment. Everyone present realized how heavy the burden of a mother waiting for certainty about her child's fate was. Meanwhile, the meat grinder from the utility kitchen in Michael's house was completely disassembled. The iron blades were separated one by one, and the tiny crevices were brushed and then sprayed with a chemical solution. There, the team found residue of a dark brown, dried liquid. The test results, once again, were the same, human DNA. Now, all that was left was to wait for the comparison results with Eleanor Vance's sample. While the lab procedures were ongoing, Riley decided to interrogate Michael again. This time, a formal interrogation room was used. A simple iron desk was in the middle, and the fluorescent light from above shone sharply, casting a harsh shadow on Michael's face. Michael sat anxiously. His hands repeatedly tapped the desk, and his legs trembled unconsciously. His face was pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. The room was cool, but when Riley entered, he tried to force a smile. "Detective, I've already explained that my wife left. If there was anything strange in the house, it's just a misunderstanding." Riley slammed a file on the desk with a loud thud. Michael flinched. "Michael Anderson, we found a lot of things that don't add up. Blood in the bathroom, signs of something being dragged, and an abnormal meat grinder. Explain it. Why was that machine in your possession?" Michael shrugged and laughed awkwardly. "That was for a side business. I was thinking of opening a craft burger joint. I bought that machine to experiment." Detective Miller, who was sitting next to him, interjected, "Your neighbor, Mrs. Gable, heard that machine running for hours in the middle of the night. Were you practicing making burgers at 2 in the morning?" Michael was silent for a moment. He swallowed hard and quickly replied, "I have insomnia. Sometimes I turn on the machine to experiment. There's nothing wrong with that, is there?" Riley leaned forward and looked Michael straight in the eye. "Insomnia doesn't make a person run a grinder for hours. You're hiding something, Michael. But remember, lies can't last forever. You can't deceive science." Michael bowed his head. His fingers stopped tapping the desk. For a moment, the room was quiet, with only the hum of the fluorescent light audible. He tried to regain his composure and said, "If you're so sure, then prove it. But I still swear, my wife left." Riley sighed and closed the file decisively. "Fine. Let's wait for the lab results. After that, we'll see who can still deny it." That night, a storm hit Greenwich. Riley sat alone in his office, looking at the pile of case files on his desk. Next to it was a photo of Sarah Anderson, given to him by Eleanor, in a plastic frame. The smile of the young woman felt contrasted with the grim reality that was slowly being uncovered. The photo seemed to speak to him, asking him not to give up until the truth was fully revealed. 2 days later, the official lab results arrived. A document with a red stamp and the signature of the forensic scientist was placed on Riley's desk. He slowly opened the document. His eyes scanned the short but hammer-like sentences. "The DNA from the bone and tissue samples found in the pipe, and the grinder matches the biological relationship, a mother-daughter relationship, with Eleanor Vance, confirmed as identical to the missing victim, Sarah Anderson." Riley closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The veil of mystery that had shrouded this case was now beginning to be lifted. There was no more room for doubt. Sarah Anderson did not leave the house. She was murdered, and the evidence was now irrefutable. He picked up Sarah's photo from his desk and looked at it for a long time. The smile was no longer just a portrait. It felt like a mission entrusted to him. He muttered to himself in a low voice, "Rest in peace, Sarah. We heard your voice through this evidence. Justice will be served soon." Outside, the rain still wet the city, but to Detective Riley, every drop of rain now felt like the approaching footsteps of truth, ready to tear down all the lies that Michael Anderson had built. The confession. That morning, the interrogation room at the Greenwich Police Department felt even more suffocating than usual. The white fluorescent light from the ceiling cast a stark shadow of the iron desk onto the floor. The room was cool due to the air conditioning, but Michael Anderson was sweating profusely. The white shirt he wore was wrinkled, its collar askew. His face was pale, and his eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept. He sat anxiously, unconsciously tapping his fingers on the desk. Detective Jack Riley entered slowly. He didn't rush. He simply placed a thick brown file on the desk. The thud of the file made Michael quickly turn his head. His gaze was anxious, as if that file contained something that would shatter his defenses. "Michael Anderson." Riley's voice was flat, devoid of inflection, but full of pressure. "The results from the state lab are in. I think you should see them for yourself." He opened the file and took out a single sheet of official paper, stamped with the red seal of the Connecticut State Forensics Laboratory, and pushed it in front of Michael. Michael bowed his head to read. His eyes moved quickly from left to right. His lips trembled. It was clearly written there that the DNA from the drainpipe and the meat grinder matched Eleanor Vance's DNA, meaning those bone fragments and tissue belonged to Sarah Anderson. Michael was silent for a long time. His hands gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. Cold sweat trickled down his forehead. His breathing was short and ragged. "I told you, you can't deceive science," Riley said slowly but firmly. "You can deny a person's words, but the traces you leave behind still speak." That's Sarah's voice, a voice demanding the truth. Michael tried to argue, but his voice was hoarse and lacked its usual strength. Maybe there was a mistake. I used that machine for beef grinding often. Hair or bone fragments could have gotten mixed in. You're misinterpreting it." Detective Miller, sitting beside him, tapped his fingers on the desk. "Don't play games, Michael. DNA doesn't lie. These results clearly show that what was in your machine and pipes at home was a part of your wife's body." Michael shook his head weakly. His eyes stared blankly at the paper. His hands trembled, tapping the desk without rhythm. He tried to open his mouth, but the words got stuck in his throat. Riley leaned forward and looked him straight in the eye. "You still have a chance. Tell the truth. How did Sarah die? What did you do after that? Don't let her family keep waiting in the dark." Michael bowed his head. His face hardened. I didn't kill her. She left. That's the truth." The answer sounded weak. Riley felt that the wall he had built was beginning to crack. He changed his strategy. From another file, he took out a photo of Sarah with their son, Leo, who was still 5 years old. In the photo, Sarah was smiling, holding a beaming Leo in her arms. Riley placed the photo on the desk right in front of Michael. "Look at this." Riley's voice was low but sharp. "This woman stood by you for almost 10 years. She gave birth to your son, cared for him, raised him. You know it too. Sarah would never leave Leo. So how can you dare to keep saying she just left?" Michael closed his eyes. His face contorted. His hands clenched his hair. His lips trembled, as if he wanted to speak, but was holding back. Riley knew that photo had struck him right in the heart. Michael finally lifted his head. His eyes were red. "It's true I did wrong. I was seeing another woman. I wanted a divorce, but I didn't kill her. I'm not a monster." His voice was more like a desperate cry than an explanation. Riley slammed his palm on the desk. A loud bang echoed. "Michael, all the evidence is in front of you. The blood, the bones, the tissue, it all points to you. How long are you going to hide behind this lie? Leo will find out the truth someday. Do you want him to hate you for the rest of his life?" Hearing his son's name, Michael quickly lifted his head. His expression changed, a mix of anger and terror. "Don't bring my son into this." His voice cracked. His hands trembled on the desk. Riley didn't back down, but softened his voice. I don't want Leo to grow up not knowing who his father is. He's already lost his mother. Don't let him lose everything because you don't have the courage to admit it. Tell me, Michael. For Leo. Michael fell silent. He covered his face with both hands. His shoulders shook. His breathing was ragged. Silence engulfed the room. Only the second hand of the wall clock could be heard ticking. Riley signaled to Miller. The two stood up and left Michael alone. Beyond the one-way glass, Riley observed him. He knew this technique. Leaving a suspect to stew in their thoughts was the most powerful pressure. In solitude, guilt often screams louder than 1,000 questions. Michael sat frozen. His hands kept pulling at his hair. Then he slowly hit his own head. He shook his head violently, as if trying to drive away a haunting vision. But the vision only grew clearer. Sarah's face, Leo's cries, and the DNA report spread out on the desk. A few hours later, when the door opened again, Michael was not the same person. His shirt was drenched in sweat, his face was contorted, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked at Riley, who re-entered, and then let out a long, heavy sigh, as if a great weight was crushing his chest. Detective, his voice was hoarse, barely audible. I have something to say, but not now. I need time. Riley looked at him for a long time, and then slowly nodded. Time will come, Michael, and when it does, the truth will just be waiting to be told. Michael bowed his head. His hands were clasped tightly on the desk. The calm mask he had worn was shattered. His defenses were crumbling, and Riley knew it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. The full confession. On a night of pouring rain, the interrogation room was used again. The white fluorescent light from the ceiling flickered for a moment before stabilizing, casting a piercing, cold light. Michael Anderson sat hunched over, the iron chair groaning under his weight. His shoulders slumped as if carrying a heavy burden. On the desk was a cold cup of coffee left from the previous interrogation, its faint aroma mixing with the metallic smell of the desk. The wall clock ticked slowly, each second adding to the tension. Detective Jack Riley entered with calm steps. This time, he didn't bring a file full of evidence. He just brought a cup of hot coffee and placed it in front of Michael without a word. Sitting across from him, he leaned back, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Michael, he said softly, you said you needed time. I gave you time. Now, tell me, what really happened in that house? Michael bowed his head. His empty eyes stared at the teacup in front of him. His hands were clasped, his fingers trembling slightly. Several minutes of silence passed. The sound of rain from outside was clear, its drumming on the roof like an endless, monotonous rhythm. Finally, he took a long, heavy breath and began to speak in a hoarse voice. The truth is, Sarah and I hadn't been happy for a long time, he said softly. Our marriage was broken. I was mostly in New York for project work, and I was only home for short periods. That's when I met another woman. Her name is Chloe Bennett. Riley didn't interrupt. He knew that in moments like this, it was best to let the suspect pour out their story. Chloe was still young, Michael continued in a bitter voice. Just 22, pretty and affectionate. Being with her made me feel young again. She made me believe I was still someone who mattered. We met often at the project site. Short meetings turned into lunches, and then it got deeper. I fell for her. Michael paused and covered his face with his hands. His voice cracked. I know it was wrong. I had a wife, a child, but every time I was with Chloe, I felt alive. On the other hand, when I was at home with Sarah, it felt empty. She was busy with housework and Leo, and I felt ignored. Riley listened intently to every word. His expression remained calm. I promised Chloe I would marry her, Michael said again. But to do that, I had to divorce Sarah. Last month, I came home with the clear intention of asking for a divorce. I even had the papers ready. I offered her a part of my assets, as long as she would let me go. But Sarah, she refused. She got incredibly angry. She screamed, cried, and threatened to humiliate me in public. She said she would find Chloe and ruin our relationship. I was scared that everything I had built, my reputation, my business, and Chloe would be destroyed. His hands clenched into fists on the desk. His eyes filled with tears. I felt cornered. If I stayed with Sarah, I felt like I would slowly die. If I divorced her noisily, I would lose everything. I didn't know what to do. Riley finally spoke up. And in the end, you chose the worst path, Michael. The path that made sure Sarah would never come back. Michael quickly lifted his head. Terror was etched on his face. No, I never intended to kill her. That night, we argued again. I was exhausted. I just wanted her to be quiet, to stop screaming. I went to the pharmacy and lied that I had insomnia. I bought sleeping pills. That night, I mixed them into her drink. I said it was a vitamin. I just wanted her to calm down, nothing more. Riley looked at him sharply. But what did you do after she fell asleep? Michael fell silent. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His breathing was heavy. He closed his eyes, trying to fight off the emerging vision. I sat in the living room for a long time. My mind was filled with Chloe's face and the promises I had made. I felt there was no other way. I only remember my hands pressing down too hard. And after that silence, a terrifying silence, the last words were broken, as if Michael himself was afraid to hear them. The room was quiet again, with only the ticking of the clock. Riley leaned forward slightly. Michael, that was the last night Sarah was alive. You know that. And now, you're the only one who can explain what happened. Don't let Leo grow up not knowing the truth. Your son has a right to know. Hearing his son's name, Michael shuddered. Tears fell. He covered his face with both hands. His shoulders shook. A muffled sob was heard. I just wanted to close the old chapter of my life. I wanted a new life with Chloe. But Sarah wouldn't leave. She was too stubborn. I lost my mind. He couldn't finish his sentence. His voice disappeared into sobs. Riley looked at the wall clock and stood up. That's enough for tonight. I won't force you anymore. We'll continue tomorrow. Remember, Michael, the longer you stay silent, the heavier the burden will be on you. Michael didn't answer. He just sat hunched over. His face was wet with tears, his hands covering his eyes. Beyond the one-way glass, Riley watched him before leaving the room. He knew that tonight, Michael had shed half of his mask. The rest was only a matter of time. Before he completely broke down, the morning in Greenwich was still gloomy. The overnight rain had left a damp air, the roads were wet, and the trees dripped water from their leaves. The interrogation room at the police station felt even quieter. Michael Anderson sat slumped over. His face was contorted, and his eyes were swollen. There was no longer any trace of arrogance, only the image of a man broken by his own energy. Detective Jack Riley entered with Detective Miller. This time, he didn't bring a file full of documents. He just sat down and looked at Michael without saying a word. The silence made Michael's breathing even heavier. Finally, he spoke up. Detective, I can't take it anymore. His voice was cracked. I'll tell you everything. Riley nodded, signaling him to continue. After the argument that night, I really felt cornered. Chloe was waiting for me, and I had promised to marry her. But Sarah refused to divorce and threatened to ruin me. My mind was in chaos. I went to the pharmacy, lied about having insomnia, and got sleeping pills. I mixed them into her orange juice, said it was a vitamin. Sarah believed me and drank it. Not long after, her eyes became glazed, her body went limp, and she collapsed on the bed. Michael paused and covered his face with both hands. His voice trembled. I sat in the living room for a long time. The ticking of the clock mixed with the sound of rain on the roof. In my head, there was only one thought. If Sarah continued to live, all my promises to Chloe would be broken. I felt I had no choice. I approached her and subdued her until she was completely quiet. It was so quiet then. A terrifying silence. Miller swallowed hard. His face hardened. But Riley remained calm, letting Michael continue his story. I panicked, but I also felt a strange relief, as if a burden had been lifted. A moment later, terror set in. I thought about how to get rid of the body. Burying it was too risky. The neighbors might see. Throwing it in the river, it would be easily found. As I paced back and forth, my eyes fell on the meat grinder in the utility kitchen. I had bought that machine before, on the pretext of a side business. That night, the machine looked like the answer. Michael bowed his head deeply. He gripped his hair with his hands. I dragged Sarah's body to the bathroom. The floor was slippery. I cleaned it over and over with cleaning solution. The pungent smell of chemicals stung my nose. I did something I couldn't even imagine myself doing. To make sure nothing was left, I then took it to the machine. That night, the machine roared for a long time, mixed with the sound of the rain. I was sure the neighbors couldn't hear it. He stopped talking and closed his eyes. Tears streamed down. The sound of that machine still echoes in my ears, a roaring sound like a never-ending nightmare. At the time, I thought everything was safe because of the storm. I was wrong. His breathing was heavy. After it was over, I put the liquid in a bucket, mixed it with water, and slowly poured it down the toilet, hoping everything would be washed away. I flushed it over and over. I spent all day on it. After that, I cleaned the bathroom with a strong cleaner and washed the machine several times. My nose stung, my eyes hurt, but I kept going. I was sure nothing was left. Michael slammed his hands on the desk. His voice was hoarse. I even put some of Sarah's clothes in a bag and threw it in a dumpster far from home. I wanted people to believe she had left home. I was really sure my plan was perfect. No body, no evidence. I thought everything was over. He looked at Riley. His eyes were red. But I forgot one thing. The truth can't be erased. No matter how much I washed, rinsed, and hid, traces remained. The DNA, the blood, the bones, all of it was still speaking. And now, all of it is suffocating me. Riley finally spoke up. You called it a solution, but look at the result, Michael. You lost your wife, you lost your freedom, and Leo lost both his parents. All because of one woman who might never have waited for you. Michael sobbed. His face was wet with tears. I was a fool, detective. Blinded by lust and empty promises. I betrayed the woman who had faithfully supported me, Sarah. I betrayed my son, Leo. I thought I could solve the problem this way, but instead, I destroyed everything. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. Every word that came out of Michael's mouth felt like a burden hitting the floor. Riley stood up and looked at him for a long time. Your confession will take this process to court. You will receive the punishment you deserve. But at least now, the truth is clear. And Leo will know someday that his mother never abandoned him. That even though she was betrayed by his father, his mother was loved. Michael slowly nodded. His body trembled. There were no more denials. The wall of lies he had built had completely crumbled. Outside, the rain began to fall again. The raindrops fell heavily, as if the sky over Greenwich was also crying along with the confession that had just been spilled. The septic tank discovery. A few days after Michael Anderson's confession, a large truck from the city's sanitation department stopped in front of the three-story house that was once considered magnificent. The morning was still foggy, and the overnight rain had left muddy puddles and a bone-chillingly damp air. The neighbors gathered in groups from a distance, some whispering, some silent with grim faces. The house that was once the pride of the neighborhood had now turned into a symbol of horror. The forensics team got out, fully geared. They wore thick masks, rubber gloves, and high boots. As soon as the lid of the septic tank in the backyard was opened, a foul stench immediately wafted out, and a thick vapor billowed up, causing several people to reflexively cover their noses with their arms. One technician even had to step back a few steps, holding back nausea. Today's work won't be easy, a forensic scientist said. His voice was muffled by his mask. We have to be careful. Even the smallest fragment can be evidence. A large hose was inserted into the septic tank, and the suction machine roared to life, starting to suck up the thick liquid from underground. The roar mixed with the overwhelmingly sharp smell of decay, making the air around the yard almost unbearable. The sucked-out liquid was passed through a large metal sieve, where the agents meticulously inspected it, bucket by bucket. For the first few minutes, only ordinary waste came out. But after a few minutes, something else got caught in the sieve. A small, white, hard piece appeared. A technician picked it up with tweezers and placed it in a sterile container. Bone fragment, he said softly. Not far away, Detective Riley let out a deep sigh. He had expected it, but seeing it directly still shocked his heart. He glanced at the residents peeking through the fence. Their faces looked horrified. Several covered their mouths with their hands, while some stepped back, shaking their heads in disbelief. The machine kept working. This time, something pale came out. Its shape was unclear. A forensic agent immediately separated it and placed it in another container. Soft tissue residue, he said briefly. The technicians' faces were grim. It was clear they were trying to suppress their disgust and, at the same time, a heavy sense of responsibility. Time passed, but the work was not yet finished. The smell grew stronger, and several agents had to go out for a moment to get some fresh air before returning. But the work could not be stopped. They knew that in the darkness of the septic tank lay the truth that had been tried to be hidden. Around noon, something got caught in the metal sieve again. This time, there was more of it. Small bone fragments mixed with a thin, faded piece of cloth. A forensic scientist carefully picked it up and examined it under the light. "This looks like a piece of clothing," he said. "Given its faded color, it could be sleepwear." Riley turned his head towards Eleanor Vance, who was standing at a distance, supported by relatives. He had asked her to wait at home, but she insisted on coming. As soon as she heard the word sleepwear, tears welled up in her eyes. She said in a small voice, "That's what Sarah often wore at home." A simple, light blue outfit. Her body trembled, and a relative next to her quickly held her so she wouldn't fall. Riley approached her for a moment and bowed respectfully. "Ma'am, we will document all of this. The truth will no longer be covered up. Please pray that we can finish this to the end." Eleanor just nodded. Her tears flowed silently. In the evening, a light rain began to fall again. The work was finally over. From the septic tank, the team had successfully collected dozens of bone fragments, soft tissue residue, several strands of black hair, and cloth believed to be from sleepwear. Everything was neatly packaged, labeled, and placed in sealed special containers. The house yard was now full of mud and work debris, and the smell of decay still lingered. But behind all that, the investigators felt a sense of relief. The scientific evidence was now supported not only by Michael's confession, but also by the actual remains that proved Sarah Anderson's fate. That night, at the police station, Riley looked at the list of evidence. It read, bone fragments, hair, cloth fabric. Every word on the paper felt heavy. He slowly closed the file and said to Detective Miller, who was sitting next to him, "No matter how much someone tries to erase their tracks, the truth always finds a way." Miller nodded with a serious face. "Detective, I still don't understand. How could a husband do this to his own wife?" Riley looked out the window, watching the fine rain falling on the glass. His voice was deep and heavy. "That's the dark side of the human heart, Miller. When love turns into lust and loyalty feels like a burden, a person can become a monster. And the saddest part is, the victim was the person he should have protected the most." Outside, the streetlights of Greenwich shone dimly through the drizzle, and inside the office, the truth was becoming clearer, even though all that was left for everyone was a deep wound. The confrontation and the trial. That afternoon, the internal meeting room at the Greenwich Police Department felt stuffy, even with the air conditioning on. On the long table in the middle were files, transparent evidence bags containing bone fragments, a few strands of black hair, pieces of faded sleepwear, and a signed lab report. Everything was neatly arranged, like silent witnesses waiting for their turn to speak. Michael Anderson was brought in, handcuffed. The sound of chains clinked with his every step. The iron chair he sat on creaked slightly as his body slumped into it. His face was pale, his eyes swollen, and his breathing was heavy, as if each breath added to the weight on his chest. Detective Jack Riley sat across from him. He opened a thick file and calmly pointed to the evidence one by one. "Michael, this is all the result of the forensics team. The bone fragments from the septic tank, the hair that matches Sarah's, the sleepwear that her mother recognized, and the irrefutable DNA test results. All of this is not a story. It is a fact that will testify in court." Michael bowed his head. His shoulders slumped. His handcuffed hands trembled. His fingers gripped the desk, as if looking for something to hold on to. He no longer denied it, but he couldn't lift his face in shame. Riley closed the file with a heavy thud. "This time, it's not just us who will hear it. There's someone who has the right to hear it directly from you." The door opened, and a female officer escorted Eleanor Vance in. The old woman wore a black hijab. Her steps were unsteady, but her gaze was firm. The atmosphere in the room immediately changed. As she walked to a chair in the corner, everyone bowed their heads in respect. Michael lifted his head for a moment. As soon as he saw his mother-in-law's face, tears welled up in his eyes. He quickly bowed his head again. His lips trembled. Riley gave him a chance. "Michael, look at Mrs. Vance. Tell her what you did to her daughter." The room was quiet. Only ragged breathing could be heard. His voice was cracked. "Mom, I ruined everything. That night, I made sure Sarah would never wake up again. I failed to protect her. Instead, I took her life. I was blind, Mom. I was so wrong." Eleanor sobbed, but her eyes still stared straight at Michael. "Michael, what did my daughter ever do to you? I raised her with love since she was a child. I saw her laugh when she learned to walk. I took her to school on an old bicycle. I was by her side until she became a mother. And now I have to see her end like this, at your hands." Michael shuddered. His tears fell onto the desk. "I don't deserve to be called your son-in-law. I was blinded by lust and empty promises that I thought were happiness. I chose a dark path, and now I have to bear the consequences." Eleanor cried even harder. Her body trembled. A relative next to her quickly hugged her. But behind the tears, her angry voice erupted. "You didn't just take my daughter's life, Michael. You took the future of my grandson, Leo. Now Leo is an orphan because of you. When he asks later where his mother is, what should I tell him?" Hearing Leo's name, Michael could no longer hold back. He fell to his knees on the floor, still handcuffed. His shoulders shook violently. "I know, Mom. I ruined my own child's life. Every night, I hear his cries in my head. I don't deserve to be called a father." The police officers in the corner looked uneasy. One of them bowed his head and closed his eyes for a moment. He couldn't bear to watch the scene. The atmosphere was quiet, filled only with sobs. Riley finally spoke up. "Michael, the court's judgment awaits you. But before that, there's a burden you will always have to carry. The face of a mother who has lost her daughter, and the gaze of a grandson who will one day demand answers. That burden will never be lifted, even after your sentence is over." Michael bowed his head deeply. His tears wet the floor. "I accept it, Detective. Whatever the punishment, I will not resist. I only have one request. Please take good care of Leo. Don't let him grow up without love." Eleanor looked at her son-in-law with tear-filled eyes. "I will raise my grandson with all my strength. But remember, Michael, every time I look at his face, I will always remember how his mother ended up at your hands. That will be a heavier punishment than any sentence the court gives." Michael cried out loud. His body slumped to the floor. There were no more defenses, no more masks. Only a man who had been destroyed by his own wrongdoing. Riley slowly closed the evidence file. "It's done. Everything is clear. Now let the law speak." The room fell silent again. Eleanor's cries faintly mixed with Michael's suppressed sobs. Outside, a fine rain began to fall again, as if the sky over Greenwich was a silent witness to this most painful confrontation. The aftermath and the wait. Weeks passed after the final confrontation, but Greenwich was still gripped by a sense of unease. The name Michael Anderson was no longer known as that of a successful real estate developer, but as a suspect accused of brutally murdering his wife. The news of the case spread quickly, gracing the pages of local newspapers to the headlines of national broadcast news. From coffee shops to living rooms, the story of Michael was endlessly discussed. At the police station, the case file, now hundreds of pages long, was finally completed. All the forensic evidence, lab reports, Michael's full confession, and witness statements were neatly compiled. Detective Jack Riley reviewed the documents one last time before handing them over to the district attorney's office. He flipped through page by page, ensuring there were no loopholes. Every detail had to be solid. "This isn't just a matter of law. It's a matter of justice for Sarah," he said softly. Detective Miller, who was beside him, nodded seriously. "Don't worry, Detective. Everything is perfect. The state lab team even said this is one of the most detailed files they've ever seen." When the official file was finally sent to the prosecutor's office, the office was quiet. The officers knew they had just closed a major chapter, although the next chapter of the trial would be heavier and more high profile. Meanwhile, at Sarah's family home on the outskirts, grief still lingered. Every afternoon, Eleanor Vance would sit on the porch, her tired eyes staring at the empty street. Sometimes, she would hold little Leo, who was innocent of it all. The child would often ask, "Grandma, when is Mommy coming home?" The question stabbed her heart deeper than any knife. She would just hug her grandson tightly, trying to give him double the love even though her own heart was broken. Relatives and neighbors took turns visiting, bringing food, offering prayers, and trying to comfort her. But every time Michael's name was mentioned, their faces would darken. "I never thought a man like him could do something like that," a neighbor whispered. A big house, lots of money, but a black heart. Michael's reputation was completely destroyed. The projects he was once proud of were halted, and his business partners distanced themselves. Even his former employees found it hard to believe their boss could commit such a cruel crime. In his detention cell, Michael spent his days with an empty gaze. The small room with damp walls was now his world. A dim fluorescent light hung from the ceiling, occasionally flickering as if about to die. The thin mattress in the corner was rarely used, as he spent more time sitting blankly on the cold floor. The musty smell mixed with the scent of rust from the bars, making the atmosphere even more suffocating. Sometimes, the sound of rats scurrying behind the walls added to his desolation. Every night, he would wake up from visions of Sarah's face and Leo's cries. The roar of the grinder, which he thought had disappeared, now haunted him again, along with the echo of the sound of chains from the handcuffs that still seemed to be on his wrists. The other inmates would look at him with curious eyes. Some would mock him, some would deliberately whisper loudly, calling him a wife killer. Michael would just bow his head and cover his ears with his hands. He felt that the world had completely rejected him. Outside the prison walls, the people of Greenwich still talked about the case. In roadside coffee shops, voices mixed with anger, sympathy, and reflection. "They say he confessed everything," a middle-aged man said. "Imagine being so cruel to your own wife." "The child is the one I feel sorry for," a housewife chimed in. "Just 5 years old, and now an orphan." But there were also those who spoke more deeply. "This is a lesson. Lust and property can blind conscience. If not controlled, a true family can be a victim." The case slowly became a subject of collective reflection. Not just gossip, but a powerful warning that the destruction of a family often begins with greed that is considered trivial. Many silently began to reevaluate their own homes, afraid of slipping down the same path. Detective Riley himself, though his duty was over, still felt a heavy heart. At night, he would sit in his dark office, staring at Sarah's photo still pinned to the case board. The young woman's face smiled simply, as if she didn't know her life would end so tragically. "Rest in peace, Sarah," he would murmur softly. "Our duty isn't over yet. We will make sure justice is truly served." Detective Miller came in with a cup of hot coffee and said, "Detective, the prosecutor's office has set a trial date. We will be summoned as key witnesses." Riley looked at the coffee for a moment and then turned his head back to Sarah's photo. His eyes were firm, but his voice trembled slightly. "I'm ready. We're not just bringing documents. We're bringing a silenced voice. The judge must hear it." In her modest home, Eleanor Vance put Leo to bed. The child slept soundly, hugging a small doll his mother had left behind. The grandmother looked at her grandson for a long time. Tears flowed silently. "Your life is still long, my dear," she whispered. "Even without your father and mother, Grandma will protect you. I want you to grow up strong, not because of the wound, but because of the love that is still left." That night, it rained again, wetting the streets of Greenwich. The raindrops fell slowly on the roofs, as if the sky itself was praying along. That even though the wound left behind might never fully heal, the truth would finally be served. The trial and the verdict. The long-awaited trial day finally arrived. From morning, the Fairfield County Courthouse was a sea of people. Police stood guard at the main gate, and reporters prepared their cameras, microphones, and tripods. Citizens crowded outside the fence, some wanting to see for themselves, some just wanting to know the latest developments in the Michael Anderson case. The case had attracted national attention, and all eyes were now on the White Building. Inside the main courtroom, the tension was palpable from the start. The wooden benches creaked as people took their seats. The air was hot and stuffy, despite the ceiling fans turning. At the front, the judge sat on a high chair, a wooden gavel in his hand, flanked by two associate judges. The prosecutor was ready with a thick pile of documents, and on the opposite side, the defense team sat with Michael. Michael wore an orange jumpsuit. His hair was disheveled, his face was deathly pale, and his eyes were hollow. He sat stiffly, his hands, briefly uncuffed, gripping the desk. His fingers trembled slightly. Occasionally, he would take a long breath, as if trying to endure a world that was collapsing around him. The gavel struck 3 times. The criminal trial of the defendant, Michael Anderson, is now in session. The judge's voice boomed, and the courtroom instantly fell silent. The prosecutor stood up, opened a file, and began to read the indictment in a thunderous voice. He described the chronology, from the purchase of sleeping pills, the couple's argument, to how the defendant eliminated the traces of his crime. The defendant's actions meet the elements of first-degree murder under the Penal Code. The defendant not only took the life of his wife, Sarah Anderson, but also made a planned attempt to cover up his crime in a cruel and inhumane way. Every word from the prosecutor's mouth felt heavy, like a gavel striking the desk multiple times. Michael bowed his head even deeper. He couldn't look at anyone. The spectators held their breath. Several women covered their mouths, while some men gripped their hands tightly on their laps. Next, the forensic scientist was called to the witness stand. He calmly explained the team's findings, the bone fragments that matched DNA, the hair identical to Sarah's, and the pieces of sleepwear recognized by the family. Photos of the lab results were displayed on a projector screen, and the courtroom fell silent, with only the ticking of the wall clock clearly audible. After that, Detective Jack Riley was called as a witness. He stood tall. His uniform was neat, his voice firm. He explained the course of the investigation, from the missing person report, the house search, to the discovery of evidence that directly pointed to Michael. Your Honor, we have no doubt. All the evidence is consistent, and there is no other possibility than the scenario that the defendant intentionally took his wife's life, he said firmly. Michael glanced at Riley for a moment, but quickly looked away. The detective's cold gaze was too heavy to bear. When it was the defense team's turn, they tried to change the atmosphere. A lawyer stood up and spoke in a softer tone. Your Honor, we do not deny what has happened, but it is important to note that the defendant was under extreme psychological pressure. He felt cornered, at a dead end, and eventually lost his reason. This was not a truly premeditated act, but a wrong decision made in a moment of emotional explosion. Another lawyer added, Michael Anderson was previously known as a loving father to his child, a husband who worked hard to provide for his family. The neighbors knew him as a kind person. We plead that these points be considered as background. The defendant is clearly at fault, but he is a human who slipped for a moment. For a moment, the atmosphere changed. A few people in the audience looked thoughtful, but angry faces still dominated. The prosecutor immediately stood up again. His voice was loud and firm. The defendant bought sleeping pills several days before the incident. He prepared a scenario to make it look like the victim had left home, cleaned the scene with chemicals, and even tried to dispose of the evidence in the septic tank. All of this clearly shows a meticulous plan, not a momentary emotion. This is a calculated, premeditated murder. The spectators began to murmur again. Some shook their heads, some pounded the wooden desk in anger. No forgiveness, someone whispered from the back row. When Eleanor Vance was called to the witness stand, the atmosphere became even more emotional. The old woman wore a black hijab. Her face was tired but firm. Her voice trembled as she said, I know my daughter, Sarah. She would never have left home, especially not her child. She was murdered by the person who should have protected her. I plead for justice for my daughter. Her tears fell, but her body was still upright. Several people in the courtroom also sobbed. An associate judge was seen bowing his head, trying to hide his emotional expression. Finally, Michael was given a chance to speak. He stood up slowly. His face was pale, his voice hoarse. Your Honor, I can no longer deny it. I have made a great mistake. I was a fool, trapped by lust and empty promises. I thought I could solve the problem that way, but instead, I destroyed everything. I have disgraced my family. Whatever punishment is handed down, I will accept it." After his confession, a long silence enveloped the courtroom. The judge struck his gavel once. "The trial is adjourned until next week to hear the prosecutor's sentencing demands and the defendant's plea." As Michael was led away, the flashes of reporters' cameras went off incessantly. The crowd outside roared. Some cursed, some just stared coldly. "Give him the chair," someone shouted. Eleanor sobbed in the arms of a relative in the courtroom. That day, Greenwich became the center of the nation's attention, not because of construction or good news, but because of a family tragedy that had turned into a massive trial. Everyone was now anxiously waiting for the decision that would be made in the next trial. Sentencing. The following week, the Fairfield County Courthouse was once again packed. Even before the sun rose, citizens had gathered in front of the main gate. Numerous reporters had prepared their cameras and microphones, and the police strictly controlled the crowd to prevent them from entering indiscriminately. That day was the most anticipated and tense day. The prosecutor was scheduled to read the official sentencing demand from Michael Anderson. The main courtroom was full. The wooden benches creaked as people packed in. The air was hot and stuffy despite the ceiling fans constantly turning. The front row was occupied by the victim's family. Eleanor Vance sat with her face covered by a black hijab. Her eyes were swollen, as if she hadn't slept all night. On the opposite side, Michael sat in his orange jumpsuit. His hair was disheveled, his face deathly pale. His body was thin, and his hands, briefly uncuffed, gripped the desk. His fingers trembled slightly. The judge struck his gavel 3 times, starting the trial. The criminal trial of the defendant, Michael Anderson, is now resumed. Today's agenda is the reading of the prosecutor's sentencing demand. The prosecutor stood up calmly and held a thick file. His voice was thunderous and full of authority. "Your Honor and associate judges, after hearing the testimony of the witnesses, examining the evidence, and considering the defendant's confession, we conclude that the defendant's actions meet all the elements of first-degree murder. Under Article 150, Paragraph 2 of the Penal Code, the defendant bought sleeping pills before the incident, prepared a scenario to make it look like the victim had left home, cleaned the scene with chemicals, and attempted to destroy the evidence in the septic tank. All of this shows intent and planning." He paused for a moment and looked straight at Michael, who kept his head bowed. The defendant's actions not only took the life of the victim, his own wife, but also caused deep suffering to the victim's family and shocked the community. This act is contrary to human values and cannot be tolerated. The atmosphere in the courtroom suddenly became quiet. Everyone was waiting for the next sentence. Therefore, the prosecutor continued in a firm voice, "We request that Your Honor sentence the defendant, Michael Anderson, to life in prison without the possibility of parole." As soon as the words "life in prison" were uttered, the courtroom stirred. The wooden benches creaked. Some people cheered in agreement, while others covered their mouths in shock. The flashes of reporters' cameras repeatedly captured the moment from various angles. Eleanor Vance bowed her head. Tears flowed endlessly. A relative immediately hugged her. A complex emotion was mixed on her face, relief that justice was near, but also the pain that a human life would end. Michael slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red, his breathing short and ragged. He stared blankly ahead, as if he had just realized that the end of his life was in sight. After the atmosphere calmed down again, the defense team was given a chance to speak. A lawyer stood up and tried to stem the tide that was clearly against them. "Your Honor, we do not deny the gravity of the defendant's actions. However, we plead that Your Honor consider the human side. First, the defendant did not try to lie before the court and honestly admitted his actions. Second, he regrets his actions, and it appears sincere from his attitude afterward. Third, he has a young son who has now lost both parents. Sentencing him to life imprisonment would close all opportunities for the child to ever hear words of apology directly from his father." Another lawyer added with a trembling voice, "Michael Anderson comes from an ordinary family. He was previously known as a kind and hardworking person by his neighbors, and he had never broken the law. We plead for an alternative of a long prison sentence, so that the defendant can atone for his mistakes behind bars for the rest of his time." not by ending his life right away. For a moment, the courtroom was quiet, but then whispers from the spectators were heard. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others whispered in anger. "Nonsense! He has to die," someone shouted from the back seat, forcing the judge to strike his gavel to restore order. Eleanor Vance, even though it was not her turn to speak, finally stood up. Her voice was low but firm. "Your Honor, I am a mother who has lost her daughter. I cannot forgive his actions, but I leave all decisions to the law. I only want justice for my daughter." Her words made many bow their heads in silence. Finally, Michael himself was given a chance to respond to the sentencing demand. He stood up slowly. His body swayed. His voice was hoarse. "Your Honor, I have no reason to defend myself. I know my life is over. If that sentence is handed down, I will accept it. I only ask for one thing. Please don't let my son grow up with the stigma of being a murderer's son. Let him grow up with love, so he doesn't inherit the sins I have committed." The courtroom was quiet again after his words. Some people looked at him with a mix of anger and pity, while others bowed their heads, reluctant to react. The judge struck his gavel. The trial is adjourned until next week to hear the defendant's final plea and the verdict. Michael was led away with unsteady steps. The reporters' cameras flashed again, capturing his pale face. Outside, the public was gathered. Some held posters that read "Justice for Sarah," while others prayed together. The shouts of anger mixed with sobs, making the atmosphere in Greenwich that day even heavier. That night, the news of the life sentence demand filled the television screens and social media. Big headlines read, "Prosecutor demands life sentence for Michael Anderson." From living rooms in ordinary homes to modern cafes, everyone was talking about the same topic. The fate of a man who was once respected was now awaiting a final verdict that would determine everything. The trial resumed. From morning, the Fairfield County Courthouse was crowded. Reporters had prepared their cameras and waited, and citizens had gathered outside the fence, waiting for what was being called the final trial before the verdict. That day, Michael Anderson was scheduled to give his final plea. The air in the main courtroom felt heavy. The wooden benches creaked as people moved restlessly. In the silence, the sound of pens scribbling quickly could be heard. The judges sat tall in their high chairs. Their faces were serious, their sharp eyes fixed on the defendant. The prosecutor looked on coldly, while the defense team sat to his right with tense faces. Michael stood up slowly from his seat. His body looked thinner than before. His face was pale, and his eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept for days. His breathing was heavy, but this time, he tried to look forward. He held a sheet of paper, looked at it for a moment, and then put it down again. "Your Honor, please allow me to speak without reading. These words come from my heart." The courtroom suddenly fell silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. All eyes were on him. Michael took a deep breath and began to speak in a trembling voice. "I am not standing here anymore as a real estate developer, a father, or a husband. I am standing here as a human who has destroyed my own life and the lives of the people I once loved. I am not trying to find excuses. I just want to apologize." He turned his head towards the victim's family section, where Eleanor Vance sat with a tired face. "Mom, I took your daughter from you in the most cruel way. I no longer deserve to call you Mom. But please listen. My regret is sincere. Every night, I see Sarah's face. I hear her voice. It stabs my heart. I know an apology can't bring her back, but let me say that I will regret this for the rest of my life." Michael's voice was hoarse, his breathing heavy. He bowed his head deeply and continued, "To the people of Greenwich, I apologize for tarnishing the name of this city. I was once considered a hard-working person, but I betrayed all trust. I know many of you are angry and disgusted just hearing my name. You have every right. I only hope that you can take a lesson from my foolishness, so that no more families are destroyed because of lust." Several people in the courtroom bowed their heads. Some cried, some shook their heads strongly, as if not wanting to be affected. Michael then lifted his face slightly. His eyes were burning red. "To my son, Leo, you may not understand now, but someday you will. My son, don't remember your father as a murderer. Remember that your father finally had the courage to admit all of his sins before the world. That is all I can leave you. The courage to be honest, even though it's too late. Eleanor covered her face with both hands. Her body trembled. A relative next to her hugged her tightly, trying to hold back the sobs that were about to burst. Michael turned to the panel of judges. "Your Honor, I do not deny anything. I am ready to accept any form of punishment. If it is a life sentence, I will accept it. If it is life behind bars, I will also accept it. I only hope that my punishment can be a lesson that there is no momentary pleasure worth the long suffering of a family." His last voice trembled, and he sat down again. The courtroom was quiet for a moment. The reporters scribbled quickly, and the cameras captured every expression. The public was divided. A man in the back seat whispered. His speech was sincere. "I can feel it." Another woman cynically retorted, "That's just a strategy. Tears won't bring Sarah back." Meanwhile, a young man gripped his knees tightly, his face red from holding back emotions. The judge finally spoke. "The defendant has delivered his final plea. The panel of judges will consider all facts, evidence, and statements before making a decision." His gavel struck the courtroom loudly once. "The trial is adjourned until next week for the verdict." The public murmured. Some cheered demanding justice. Some were silent in thought. A few chairs creaked as people couldn't wait to leave the room with heavy hearts. Getting up too quickly, Michael was led away with unsteady steps. His face was no longer wet with tears, but with sweat. His eyes stared blankly at the floor. The flashes of reporters' cameras went off incessantly, capturing the image of a man who was once respected, but had now fallen to the lowest point. Outside the building, the crowd grew larger. Some held posters that read "Justice for Sarah." Some sat and prayed together, and some shouted in anger. Greenwich was once again in an uproar. Everyone was now waiting for next week, when the judge would read the verdict that would decide Michael Anderson's life and death, and close the chapter of a long trial filled with tears. That day, the Fairfield County Courthouse was once again a sea of people. Citizens had gathered since dawn. Some stood under the hot sun. Some waited in nearby coffee shops, discussing the latest news. Everyone knew that today was the final trial. The panel of judges would read the verdict on the defendant, Michael Anderson. The atmosphere in the main courtroom was more tense than usual. The reporters filled the back rows, their cameras ready to capture every moment. The wooden benches were packed with victims, families, relatives, and citizens who wanted to witness history. Eleanor Vance sat in the front row. A black veil covered her face, and her hands gripped a small bag on her lap. Michael was brought in by police officers. His body looked weak, his face pale. But this time, he didn't bow his head. He tried to look forward, but his gaze was empty. The defense team sat next to him with serious faces. The prosecutor was already prepared, looking sharply at the defendant. The judge's gavel sound started the trial. The criminal trial verdict hearing for the defendant, Michael Anderson, is now opened. The judge's voice boomed, and the courtroom instantly fell silent. The judge opened a thick file in front of him and began to read the summary of the verdict. His voice was calm, but every word felt heavy. The panel of judges has considered all the trial facts, the testimony of the witnesses, the physical evidence, and the defendant's plea. It is legally and convincingly proven that the defendant has committed the crime of premeditated murder against his wife, Sarah Anderson. He continued, "The panel of judges finds that the defendant's actions were carried out in full consciousness. The defendant bought sleeping pills beforehand, prepared a scenario to cover up his actions, and attempted to destroy the physical evidence. All of this shows a meticulous intent." Several people in the courtroom began to murmur. Sobs were heard from the victim's family section. Eleanor Vance bowed her head. Tears flowed, and a relative next to her gripped her hand tightly. The judge then read other considerations. The panel of judges also notes the defendant's plea, who regretted and admitted his actions in court. However, regret cannot erase the consequences of his actions. The defendant has taken the life of a wife, a mother, and destroyed the future of a child. Therefore, the regret is not sufficient to reduce the weight of the sentence. The atmosphere became more tense. The reporters wrote quickly, and the cameras zoomed in on Michael's pale face. His lips moved as if he was quietly praying. The judge took a deep breath and said the sentence that everyone was waiting for. Therefore, the panel of judges sentences the defendant, Michael Anderson, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered in relief, some cried, and some were silent in shock. Eleanor Vance sobbed loudly. Her body trembled. Several people in the back row spontaneously applauded, but were immediately quieted by police officers to maintain order. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. His face was still pale, but this time there were no tears, only a faint smile, whether as a sign of resignation or relief that the long wait was over. The judge firmly concluded the trial. Thus, this verdict has been read in an open trial. The trial is closed. The gavel struck 3 times, ending the long journey of the trial. Police officers immediately took Michael away. The flashes of reporters' cameras lit up his face. Outside the building, the public waited with roars. Some shouted, "Justice is served," some held up posters with Sarah's face, and some cried with emotion. On the other side, the defense team could only bow their heads. They knew from the beginning that this case had almost no loopholes. The prosecutor stood with a firm face, feeling that justice had been served, and closed his file. Eleanor Vance was still sitting in her seat. Her face was wet with tears. A relative whispered, "Mom, the verdict is out. Sarah has finally gotten justice," but the mother just stared blankly ahead. Her heart was still filled with an irreplaceable loss. Outside, the people of Greenwich were actively discussing the verdict. Some felt relieved. Some said this would be a strong warning to anyone who would destroy a family with crime. "This is a lesson. Don't be blinded by lust," a grandfather said in a coffee shop. "The law can give justice, but the wound of the victim's family will never heal." Another person chimed in. That afternoon, the sky over Greenwich was cloudy. A fine rain fell, wetting the courthouse yard that had witnessed a long drama. The verdict had been handed down, but the echo of the trial still lingered in the hearts of everyone present. Michael was transferred back to the detention center under strict guard. As he walked down the corridor, his steps sounded heavy, but he no longer bowed his head. He walked with a resigned face, as if accepting that this was the end. That day marked the end of a long journey of a trial filled with tears, anger, and prayers. But for the victim's family, the wound would remain, even though the verdict had been read. Conclusion: the verdict has been handed down, and the long trial is over. But for the victim's family, especially Eleanor Vance and her young grandson, the journey is just beginning. Leo will grow up without a father and mother, relying only on the love of his elderly grandmother. The wound of loss will never fully heal, but life must go on. The Michael Anderson case has become a powerful warning for all of us. It shows how a seemingly happy family can be destroyed in an instant when selfishness and desire are allowed to take over. Property, position, and the temptations of the world can never be compared to the harmony of a home. Once trust is betrayed, the consequences can destroy many lives. Through this tragedy, we learn that regret always comes too late. Love and loyalty should not be sacrificed for momentary pleasure. The family is the greatest blessing that must be protected, not a thing to be destroyed. Listeners, do you think this punishment is fair? Leave your opinion in the comments and support this channel with likes and subscriptions.